All right, well, good morning. It's good to see all of you here this morning. See some of you are standing on the back row. Front row is a great spot. I might ask you a question, I might not. I don't know, but it's totally up to you. But anyway, there's some seats available up here. Hey, it's good to see everybody here this morning. I appreciate you braving the frozen tundra of the parking lot to be in here in this typical Alabama weather here that we're experiencing right now. So good, 20s. Yeah, we love that here. But it's a good day, and it's a good time to be in here. Let me take just a minute and point all of us forward to next Sunday evening, celebration dinner. You've been hearing us talk about this now for several weeks. Just want to emphasize how great this night is and how important it is for you to be here, especially if you're a member, you're invested in this church. We definitely want to see you here, but it's open to anybody. If you're a guest that's just come for the first week and you're interested in our church, we'd love for you to come. We're going to do several things that night. We're going to eat, which I really love. Vendatories, which we use quite often for that night. They're going to be providing dinner again, so we look forward to that. Fellowshipping with one another, getting to know some people that maybe we've never met before. I like to spend some time looking back on the year of ministry that we've been in and celebrating all that God has been doing, and so you'll hear some of that. I love to then kind of take a turn and talk about where we're going as a church, the vision that God has laid on our hearts. So one thing about this year is I'm looking forward 2 years down the road to the year 2020. In January of 2020, we will experience our 20th anniversary as a church. So that's going to be a big year for us and a big time for us, and we want to be able to not only celebrate that night really well in 2020, but we also want to look at the vision that God is laying on our hearts for the future. So we're going to take these next couple of years and really listen and dial into what God is calling us to do. Celebration dinner will kind of be the very beginning of that process. So you'll want to be here to hear all about that. I encourage you to come. Also, we're going to be doing baptisms on that night. So if you're somebody who maybe you've accepted Christ but never been baptized, and that's a step that you're ready to take, we would love for you to do that night. Or maybe you've not accepted Christ or never been baptized, but you'd love to talk about that. We would love to talk with you after this service. I'll be right here up front. If that's something you're interested in, you can come talk to me, or you can just wait this week. Connect with Lynn Blunt in the church office, and she can also talk you through that process. But we love celebrating baptisms on that night. So anyway, 5:30 next week. Look forward to seeing you all there. You can go to the website and register. Let us know that you're coming for the food and for our Cornerstone kids, so that would be very helpful. All right, this morning we're going to continue in a series that we just started last week called Visioneering. And if you're new today, just jumping in with us, let me see if I can catch you up a little bit. The word visioneering is not a real word, just so you know. It is a word that we stole from somebody else who made it up. So that just really makes it great. But it's just a great word when you think about having a dream or a vision for your life or for something that's going on in your world. Visioneering is just the process of engineering a vision. It's having this dream and then having a way to achieve that. The word vision, by the way, and a lot of times we talk about that in this day and age, and it just brings about weird connotations. You know, is that the thing I have when I eat bad pizza and I go to sleep and I have a weird dream and I wake up and go, was that real? And that's not what we're talking about. That's not the kind of vision. We're talking about basically a picture of the preferred future. So a vision is just a picture of the preferred future, that whatever out there that you want to see happen. So if that's your life, your physical health, just for example, you want six-pack abs, but you're here where I am, with a one-pack called Marshmallow, and you want six-pack abs, well, it's like I look at myself a year from now and go, look at those abs. Look at that guy. I want to be that guy. Okay, well, that's my vision. That's my picture of the preferred future. Marcus is shaking your head. Anyway, we'll talk about you later. So, looking out there and saying, you know what, there is a dream that I have for my life, for my kids, for my family, for my job, for my, whatever. It's out there, and I have a picture of that as a vision. And, God is still giving his people and his church visions and dreams and all these kinds of things. And really, when I talk about or think about vision, I think about our church. And, for 18 years, we have been living out a vision that God has placed on our hearts. And I think about a long time ago, this sort of small group of people who were meeting in the skate center in Auburn and dreaming of a future. And we literally, I wanted the drawings up here of this building to be on this card, just as a reminder that, there was a day when we were literally drawing out a part of that vision. And 18 years ago or, whenever, we were worshiping in a skate center and saying, you know what, this is not the vision that we have. For those of you who are in the skate center, you'd say, thank the Lord. I mean, it was an interesting time. For 5 or 6 years, we lived in that skate center, but we all dreamed of another day. We all dreamed of this future where we were growing and where we would one day have a home of our own that would be a place where people would come. And as we were designing that building, it was never a focus on the building. This was just the vehicle for God to do his work through us. We were always talking about the people who would come as a result of building this building, that lives would be changed, that people would come to Christ, that many would be baptized, that marriages would stay together and families would become whole, and that we would impact this community and we would feed the hungry and do all the things that we're doing now. It's like this awesome deal. But back then, it was a dream of ours, a picture of a preferred future to move forward in this vision. And so really, if you're somebody who has come here since we built this building, you are the product of our dream. You are the fruit of that. We were dreaming of you coming one day and hopefully impacting and changing your life. And really for these next 2 years between here and 2020, now we're going to be the people who are going to dream again about the future and see what God is calling us to do to reach out in even bigger ways to reach people who are not in the church yet, who don't know Christ. So that's going to be a great opportunity for us. So that's just kind of like visioning in terms of the church, but now kind of, back to our lives. I think about that, vision for our life does some things when we have a vision out there. It clarifies our life and it limits our options in the right way. We don't do other things because we have a vision of where we're going. Like if you're a college student, let's just play something out here. An example may be, okay, so I'm in college and I'm going to get this degree. Well, that limits your options. Now you're working on this degree, you're not working on a lot of other things. And once I get this degree, I'm looking to get this job. Well, that limits your options and clarifies and narrows. I'm looking to, who knows, get married, have kids, live in Auburn, it'd be great. And like you have an idea of where your life is going, obviously placed on the vision that God has for you, but once you have that idea, of where you're going, it tends to narrow the focus and keep you moving in the right direction. It also removes distractions. Like we're not distracted by so many things. Like if we don't know where we're going, everything's a possibility. So everything could be a distraction from this other thing that we may really need to be doing. It provides direction. It provides motivation. Like we know what we're doing every day. It provides purpose. It's tough to live without purpose. But God has given us all a purpose and a reason to be here and a specific way to carry out that purpose. And it's like once we dial into who God has made us to be and we look at our life and we go, man, I have gifts, I have abilities, I've been put in this particular place to live, I've been going to this school, like I could be anywhere in the world, but I'm here. Like, why am I here? What am I doing here? God begins to show you like, okay, now let's start talking about where you need to go and what you need to do. And so I just think that having a vision, having a dream is so important for any of us. In the Bible, that was like from beginning to end is this talk about visions and dreams. But specifically when you go to the Old Testament and you look in the book of Nehemiah, and we just started talking about him last week here, and Nehemiah was somebody who had been given a vision and a dream and needed to carry that out. And so let me just recap that really quick for all of us, that Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king in Persia at a time when Jerusalem had been laid waste by enemies who had come in and completely dominated that area. And so the city of Jerusalem was in ruins and the wall had been broken down and it was in chaos, and the people there were just subject to all sorts of pagans who were coming in and ransacking the city and all of that. And so there was this problem that was happening here. Well, Nehemiah, who is a Jew, and that's his homeland, that's his city, that is the capital of his religion and faith, gets word of what's happened in Jerusalem and how bad it is. And getting this word, he just began to well up a burden inside of him for Jerusalem and the people there. So much so that he wept and he prayed and he mourned and he fasted, and all these things. And then finally, it was laid on him that he should go back to Jerusalem and he should rebuild the city. And so God put this vision in his heart. And so the first step that he takes is he gets on his knees and he prays to God. God, I believe this is what you're calling me to do, but I need to give this to you. Like, I don't need to go anywhere without you being involved in this. And he said, also, I have to take a very important step. I have to go to the king and ask for permission. And as we talked about last week, that was dangerous. He could literally lose his life or at least his job and all these kinds of things by doing this. And so he prays, God, help me take this step. And we remember what happens. He goes to the king, and he asks the king if he can go back to Jerusalem and bring grace and honor on his people and himself and all this kind of stuff. And, the king is favorable towards it in this dramatic moment and says, okay, I'm going to let you do that. And God has favor on the king, helps Nehemiah make this decision. And so, if you wanted to look at some sort of process right here, it would be burden, prayer, and then action. Burden, prayer, and action. I have a burden. I pray to God. I go and do something. He went to the king, had to make that first step happen. That's kind of how that went for him. And really, this first step in this process for Nehemiah was about obedience. I believe it was about obedience. I believe it was Nehemiah knowing that it was going to be hard and difficult and what he was about to encounter. But I believe this is so important and that God has, for whatever reason, brought it to Nehemiah. And Nehemiah said, you know what? I need to be obedient here. And he takes this step, this first step. And it's interesting because when the king gives him the okay, it says in there immediately after that, so I set a time. It's like he had his phone in his pocket and he went, okay, I can go, bam, here's the date. Here's when I'm going. This is when we're going, right here. He was ready to go, and he began to take those first steps. So he begins to move from beyond just having a burden and a vision and a dream to then doing something about it and making a process happen. And again, God didn't just call anybody to do this work. While there were lots of people in that day who had a burden and were sad about Jerusalem and what was going on there, plenty of people knew about it, but God came to Nehemiah, and Nehemiah was the one who was chosen to go and do this and to make this happen. So, okay, let's do this. Let's go into the book of Nehemiah. Let's go to chapter 2. I want to look at chapter 2 and chapter 4 this morning. So go to chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 11, maybe go over to 4 and put a placeholder right there, and we'll get there in just a minute as we talk about what it means to move from burden to really process and making a vision happen. So it says in chapter 2, verse 11, I went to Jerusalem, Nehemiah says, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one that I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate. The naming of the gates. What committee decided Dung Gate? What a great name for that gate. It's the holy city, Dung Gate. Anyway. Nothing. Let's move along. Examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. So at this point, he's trying to just get this all figured out and investigate this vision, this burden that God had laid on him to see what was the root problem, what was the issue here, and what are we going to have to do to make this work. And also, he didn't want anybody to know because he knew that there would be people who would be against this work, and he didn't want to let them in early on what he was thinking about doing. So at this point, he keeps it to himself. Then he turns around and he says to them, which are all the nobles, officials, the people who would actually be doing this work. He says to them in verse 17, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. This is such a good point right here, this moment where, it's like, okay, so here's the thing. Look at Jerusalem. I don't have to even tell you what the problem is. You can see it, right? And I'll go, yes, we see it. It's a problem. The city is in ruins. The wall is broken down. We've been devastated. And he's like, well, okay, then let's do something about that. Let's rebuild this thing together. And you can just imagine he's just rallying these people, like you see the problem, I see the problem. Let's not let it sit here like this. We know this is not right and not good. This is our holy city. Let's rebuild it. And after that rally cry, they all went, yeah, let's do it. It was just a big whoosh. Everybody was excited. Everybody now saw the vision. Everybody saw the dream, and they knew what to do. And so they began the work, right? When there's a burden, there is work to be done. And if a burden's been laid on our life, we know that it can't just sit there just as a burden, but there are steps that we have to take to move toward making that dream a reality, to dealing with the burden or the problem and the issue that has been laid before us. And in this case, it just, again, is so interesting to me. It just took one man. God came to Nehemiah and said, I want this to happen. And Nehemiah carried the burden, and then he revealed that to others, and then things started happening. It's like, I just think about the power of one and what God can do just through one person to get something started, to make something happen. I'm reading this book by John Ortberg, and the title of the book is interesting in itself. I'd like you more if you were more like me. How about that for a title of a book? I'd like you more if you were a lot more like me. But anyway, so that's the title of the book. So in there, though, he tells this great story of going to jury duty, which is, how many of you have been to jury duty? You ever done that? Yay, we love jury duty. I've actually not been to jury duty. I guess it's because I'm a pastor. But anyway, they don't want us in there. So he tells this story in this book about going to jury duty. He starts it off with, it was 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and I was one of 150 unhappy campers sitting on plastic chairs crammed into a sterile basement room in San Mateo County Courthouse, reporting for jury duty. We all had one thing in common. We wanted to be somewhere else. And then he says, but then Larry happened. Larry was a government worker who came in, and his job was to basically prep everybody for what jury duty was all about and to make sure that the right people were supposed to be there. Well, it's a pretty simple job, apparently, that doesn't require a lot, and you really don't even have to say a lot if you don't want to. But not Larry. Larry comes in and starts firing up the troops. He says, I know you're all busy people, but I just want to say thank you. I want to tell you on behalf of the judges and our legal system and the county of San Mateo and really our whole nation, we're grateful for your service. Everybody started dropping their phone and looking around like, who is this guy? What is happening? And so Larry goes on. He talks about how incredibly meaningful it is and that this is the foundation of our judicial system and everybody should have a right to trial by jury by their peers and on and on and on, and everybody's like, oh my gosh. Then he tells this story of this lady. He's like, one time there was this lady, 95 years old. She was summoned to jury duty. She didn't have a car. So she rides 3 buses to get to the courthouse. And she gets there, and I remember she came walking in, and I started talking to her. This is Larry. And I started talking to her, and I was like, by the way, did you call in before you came to make sure that you're even needed today? And she's like, well, I didn't because I don't have one of those push-button phones. I am not talking about a cell phone. I'm talking about just a landline with push buttons. She had a rotary phone. How many remember rotary phones? Not many. There. I do. I called Becky and asked her to go with me on a rotary phone. It was at my grandma's house. And you would go, zzz, remember this? It's great, rotary phone. Anyway, that's a side note. But this lady couldn't call in. But you know what? She would not be deterred. She's like, I'm going. No matter what happens. So she goes. I don't know if she was needed or not, but it impressed Larry so much by her dedication and commitment and wanting to be there and do her civic duty. And then he launches from there and starts talking about history and how many people have given their lives for the sake of being able to vote, and people in other countries, they don't even get to vote, and blah, 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 going on and on. So anyway, John Ortberg is sitting out there, and he's like inspired. And the judge finally, or the people call his number, so he jumps up and he goes into the judge, and the judge is asking him all these questions, said, could you, tell somebody or convict somebody of being guilty? And John's like, I'm a pastor. He's like, the Bible says everybody's guilty. So you know what, I have no problem with that. I could even pronounce you guilty. And then immediately after that, he says, I was not selected for jury duty. But he says it was such an awesome experience, and when he left and some other people left that weren't selected, they were like, man, how about Larry? Who's that guy? I've never thought about jury duty like this in my life. I'm going to think long and hard before I vote next time, all this kind of stuff. So they were all inspired and everything. And, and John in the book was just like, just Larry and his passion on display. Just one person who loves what they do and believes in it. Anybody can be Larry. We don't have to be some amazing biblical character. We don't have to be Moses or all these big things. God called lots of people who were just kind of the people on the edge. He just called people who were normal people just trying to do their thing. And we have something very important to be passionate about. Do you agree with me? We have the hope of salvation, the joy of of God's grace and hope in our life. We have the heaven one day. I mean, good grief, there's a lot to be passionate about. We just have to get it out of us so that other people can see it. And Nehemiah was doing that. He was just displaying his passion, and this journey that he's on is very much a picture of like spiritual maturity. It's like, growing in your faith in Christ. It's like being willing to take a step and move along. It's not enough for us just to believe in God. I mean, yes, we gain salvation through that, but because of our faith in God, we should be producing fruit in our life. We should be moving forward. James, the book of James, is like very clear about that. He's like, even the demons believe in God and shudder, but they just do nothing about it. He says faith without works is dead. That's a pretty harsh statement right there. But it's like, man, if there's nothing produced, no fruit in your life, then you have to go back and wonder, how was that original decision? Like, there should be movement in our life, some sort of spiritual maturity that is happening where we're moving from here to there. And, it's kind of like a young couple has a new baby, and we got lots of new babies here in this church, but you have a new baby, and you're like, this is great, I love this baby. And we all love the baby as a baby. They're wonderful. But we have a vision for this life, right? That one day we will feed this child and raise it and grow up and be a productive member of society and love the Lord and maybe become a preacher. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe not that. I don't know. But what we don't do is go, look at this baby. I can't wait till this baby is a 40-year-old baby. Man, how awesome it will be to see a 40-year-old man in a onesie with a pacifier, and a full beard. And take me out of it. Nobody would think that about their child. Nobody thinks about that happening. We all believe we're going to grow up. And in the same way with our spiritual maturity, we don't want to stay like at level 2. Like the point is to grow in our faith, is to move along. And you know what I think? The more that we grow in our understanding of God and the closer that we get to Him, the Bible says He gets close to us, and then we begin to see the vision that He has for our life and for this world. Sometimes we're just stuck in the gray or the dark, and we're wondering because, what does God want for my life? Well, let's take some steps. Let's take some risks. Let's do something we've never done before when it comes to following God and see what happens next. See, watch Him unfold something in front of us. James 4:7, back to the book of James, he says, submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will what? Yeah, every time when you take steps toward God, He gets closer to you. And in these moments, is when we just really begin to see things that we've never seen before. And then we're inspired to do something about that. All right, so back to Nehemiah. Let's go over to chapter 4 real quick. Chapter 4, verse 15. They're building the wall by this point. Construction has happened. They are now encountering opposition, and enemies to the process are starting to distract them. So in verse 15, it says, when our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to their own work. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore a sword at his side as he worked, but the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Then I said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. And so this process of building the wall has happened, and all of a sudden now they're encountering struggles, things that are taking away from the time that it's going to take to build. It's literally taking manpower away. They literally have to have swords and bows with them, to defend themselves while they're building the wall. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, you know what? God didn't tell Nehemiah, go build the wall, and it'll be so easy. I'll take all the obstacles away. It should be a piece of cake. Don't worry about it. It's not how that goes. All God promises, I'll be with you, Nehemiah, as the enemies are distracting you, as the work stops because you have to do other things, as it gets hard, as people give up, I'll be with you. And you know what? For all of us in our life, really, frankly, life is hard. But when God calls us to do something and we begin to follow Him, He does not promise it's going to go easy or go, smooth or no problem. All He promises, I'll be with you. And when you do encounter those hard things, I'll be right by your side, helping you go through it, never leaving you, never forsaking you. And I think sometimes we look at hard things in our life when we're trying to follow God and we think, oh no, what happened? Where did God go? What did He do? He changed the plan or whatever. It's like, hang in there. Usually it's not God that leaves, it's us. And there are consequences, by the way, when we choose not to go through the hard things and we don't do what we should be doing. It's kind of like this. Here's a crazy illustration for you. It's kind of like the golden wing warbler. You know what that is? It's a bird. I'll just go ahead and tell you. It's a bird. It's a little bird. Scientists recently had an interesting phenomenon with the golden wing warbler over in East Tennessee. They were trying to put these geo-tracking devices on the bird. It's a little bird. It's really lightweight, really hard to get a tracker on there. But they succeeded in getting tracking monitors on them, crazy enough. What they discovered that was interesting was shortly after they got the monitors on them and shortly after the birds laid eggs and had chicks, they left, which is very unusual, and especially when they leave the chicks. All these birds left and went 500 miles away. They're tracking them going, what is happening? Why are they migrating all of a sudden? They just got to East Tennessee, just had these babies. Well, eventually they started coming back. In the process, the scientists and researchers discovered that a huge storm system was moving into East Tennessee, and right before it did is when the birds left. And they found that these little golden wing warblers have some kind of, I got to get this word right, infrasound frequency. So they have the ability, based on a particular frequency that a storm emits, to know when that's coming, and to them that says danger and they need to leave. Well, the problem is, when you leave your chicks behind, and every day matters to them, there are consequences to that. And they said, these birds lost time, energy, and some of their chicks didn't make it because of that. And what struck me in this article was there were consequences to fleeing the storm. That just stuck in my mind. I'm like, the old golden wing warbler, don't do that. How many times do we encounter a struggle and maybe the first response is flee, get out of it. Or the prayer is, God, take this away from me. When really, maybe what we're supposed to be doing is embracing it and praying, God, help me to embrace it more, this struggle, so that I can know what it is you need me to learn, so that I can grow in my faith, so that I can be more Christ-like, so that I can, whatever it is you're trying to teach me through this, Lord, I want all of it. Give me the whole thing. That's a different prayer, isn't it? That's a different prayer. But I think that's a good prayer. And the truth is, we will be tempted to give up on whatever is important, and especially the things that we're doing to follow God. The enemy's always going to be distracting us. We'll be tempted to give up on our vision for life, or we'll be tempted to give up on our marriage, or we'll be tempted to give up on doing the right thing with our kids. We may be tempted to give up on following God or serving Him in a particular way, or we may even be tempted to give up on church, or give up on our commitments, or give up on taking the next right step that God has placed in front of us. I don't know, but there will be temptations along the way. Because the enemy wants you to give up so bad, he will even give you excuses. He will give you justifications for why you're choosing not to do this hard thing so that you can feel a lot better. Because frankly, it's easier to lie. It's easier to cheat. It's easier to stay home and watch Netflix. It's easier to not deal with your teenage kids when it's hard. It's easier, easier. Let me give you a phrase. I want you to remember this one. It's up on the screen. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Every time. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong every time. If you're a parent and you have a child who could understand that, you might want to share that with them, in whatever you're doing in your life, at school, with your friends, wherever you go. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong, because right is often hard and wrong is often easy. But the best fruit that is born is in the hard right. It is in choosing that path that has been laid out before us and going through it. And just like Nehemiah said, our God will fight for us. Or like Joshua telling the Israelites when they're crossing the Jordan River, about to go face a whole bunch of pagan nations that they have to conquer before they go into the promised land. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And in the Hebrew, we translate that Rock Kazak. It's such a great statement. Somebody told me this morning at the first service we should make t-shirts that say Rock Kazak. Rock Kazak. Be strong and courageous. Your God is with you. He will fight for you. All those kinds of things. It's like this. Throughout the Bible, it's this constant theme of be courageous, people. And it may take courage to do the next right thing, but it's okay because God is with you. He's going ahead of you. Even better. Are you tracking with me? You getting me on this? Yeah, baby. That's what I'm talking about. I don't know who that was. A little child, some babies understanding me, which is my level. It's all right. It's good. And I just imagine, man, if all of us in here and, I don't know, just everybody connected to our church, whatever that is, 800, 1,000 people, if we all just went all in with all of this and we just said, you know what, whatever, God, you want, I'm going to do it, total obedience. If we just said, God, total obedience, every day, God, today is about total obedience. I want to give you all that I am and all that you're calling me to be, and I want to know what that is, and I want to follow you well. I want clarity. Help me do that. Imagine what happens in this community when we really genuinely say, God, I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and I love my neighbor as myself. Man, there's a lot out there. In my devotion this week, I read this quote, and this is the last thing I want to share with you this morning. It says, crises of every kind will find us, but these crises enter our lives not just as challenges to retain our balance and stability, but as invitations to stretch our hearts and minds. Every crisis includes within itself an invitation for us to move from being good people to becoming great people. Moving from where we are to where God wants us to be. And I think it just begins with this one step of turning to God and saying, God, I want to be obedient and I want to follow in every way that you call me to do. Because I trust that you'll be with me no matter what happens. Amen? Let's pray.